Okay, Madam Chair, we are live and we can go ahead.
All right, I will call this meeting to order of the Malahide Remuneration Review Committee and August 11, 2020. First order on the agenda is the disclosure of pecuniary interest. And is there anyone that has anything to disclose?
No.
No?
Nope.
Okay, and going from there to the approval of minutes from July 28th, pages 3 to 5 on your agenda, in your agenda package. Is there any changes to the minutes? We will talk about, shortly, we will talk about business arising from them, but does anyone see any errors or omissions in those minutes?
No, I didn't.
And if not, could I have a mover and seconder, please?
The just the very first line there at 10:70 a.m. We got one too many zeros there. The Council Remuneration Committee met via video conference at 10:70.
Oh,
That's true.
thank you. We'll make that clarification in the final version. Thank you.
All right, seen that. So
Okay, so somebody to move or second those with that update.
I can move.
Kevin, move. I'll second.
And is everyone in favor?
Yes.
Yes? Me?
Yes.
Motion is carried. Okay, business arising from the minutes. Report CAO 1309, the 2014 Municipal Election Council Composition and Ward Boundaries. This was something that we had asked. We were discussing, we did have a discussion last meeting, I believe, about the various population of Malahide and the number of ratepayers, and that kind of led to a discussion about wards and ward boundaries. And so that was provided to us. So is there any follow-up or questions from that report?
Madam Chair, if I may, just as a point of clarification, while the terms of reference and one of the other reports from one of the other municipalities, our sample ones that we had looked at last time, had included in their terms of reference council composition as one of the items that their council compensation review committee was supposed to look at. Upon further review, it's been noted that this particular mandate of this committee is directly related to compensation, isn't actually, the mandate isn't involving any changes to either council compensation or, council composition or ward boundaries. So while this is some background information for the committee, your mandate doesn't actually include a review of the council structure or the board structure. And it was brought to my attention and went upon further review and went back to look at our terms of reference. And indeed, it is just strictly compensation that is the role of this committee. So I just wanted to mention that to the committee. It's this information, some of it is still relevant in the sense that it gives you a little bit more background about council itself, but otherwise delving into how the number of council members or the structure of the wards is not something that's within the current mandate of this group.
Understood. That's an important point. Thank you for clarifying that. And as I recall, I think we basically sort of got talking first about just what is the population and what does each councillor, sort of who do they represent. And it was interesting to see how fairly well balanced those wards are, I thought. And that was interesting information to have. Excuse me. I don't think it was the intent of any of these members to actually start looking at that composition and making major changes that way. That certainly wasn't my intent, speaking for myself, but that was interesting information to have.
Yeah, so as I said, it's just some background for the committee, but just wanted to clarify the role.
Any other questions or comments on that report? And if not, the other report from the business arising from the minutes is FIN 1827, and that's the council remuneration. That's pages 11, 17, and this refers to a report that was done in 2018 for council's benefit as to various options and so forth. So are there questions or comments on that report? Martin?
Other than, yeah, the fact that the counselors actually ended up voting in favor of lower, reducing that a year early, or implementing the additional tax on a T4 a year early, that kind of blows my mind. How, whose fault's that? Like, who's responsible for that? What council would go ahead and do that if they, I think they were led down the garden path a little bit here. That's my personal feeling.
Are you talking about the 1/3 tax?
Right, the 1/3 tax was implemented a year before it needed to be, and it's bad enough that they had to pay the additional tax, but they ended up getting that getting axed a year early, earlier than the federal government required us to. That's very unfortunate. That's a kick in the teeth, in my opinion, to our council.
But they did, correct me if I'm wrong, but they did have options to compensate their salary, correct?
Yes, through you,
From
Madam
that
Chair.
report.
Yes,
Well,
through
they
you,
have
Madam Chair. The
four
report
options.
does indicate that the requirement did not come into effect until January 1st, 2019. Information was provided. There were a number of options that were provided by staff to address that, including taking no action. And the budgetary implications were also included in that report. There was the chart that was outlined at the end that indicated which members would require additional top-ups per se to make sure that the net amount at the end of the period was going to be the same. And then the council was given the option to move forward or not, and they chose to implement the change at that point in 2018. We have since, as Martin has indicated, we've since received reports from members of council that they didn't entirely understand that they were doing it in advance of the requirement to have to do it, or some members didn't recognize that, and we've received some concerns about it, which is why this item has been brought forward and discussed at council several times over the last few years. And then ultimately as well, why council decided in May last year to actually go ahead and make those adjustments, which we'll get to later on in the agenda. But I don't agree with you, Martin. I think some members of council didn't fully appreciate at the time, although it was definitely outlined in the report, the effective date of the new legislation.
I would question why the council would even have brought that forward a year early. I mean, if we have a change in requirement, if we have a required change at our place of work as an employer, I'm not gonna, and it's gonna cut their teeth. I'm not gonna do that until it is required. I'm very frustrated that they ended up having to actually even talk about that a year too early. That's the way I feel about that part of it. I know that's not what this committee's totally about, but I think it's somebody's approved something they weren't fully approved. And I guess the next question is, how often does that happen in the council floor? They're approving things that they're not fully aware of.
So you're talking about like they originally, when I read it, the report was put out to the council 2017, but it wasn't really coming into effect till 2019, correct? And why are you saying, why did they do it instead of just waiting? Just go ahead and do it?
Well, why did they get the full 100% T4 instead of the 1/3, 2/3, 1/3? Why did they get that taken off their pay a year early? Their take-home pay a year early.
Did that happen, Michelle?
Yes, it did happen. The report was presented in 2018, not in 2017.
They passed bill C-44 in March 2017.
Right. This particular report was presented to council in November of 2018
Okay.
with recommendations to come into effect for 2019.
Okay. Okay, that was not in the, yes, it was, okay. The net pay for 2018, correct, okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
But essentially, the decision was made that affected the 2018 compensation,
Yeah.
council members, as opposed to waiting and having it affect 2019.
Yeah.
That decision was made after council reviewed this report and all of the options that were outlined in the report.
Mm-hmm.
Of course,
Yep.
I might add that, sort of speaking back to Martin's point, like I understand where you're going with that. It's these reports do have to be done ahead of time, partly because of budgetary implications. I would expect that if they had chosen to choose an option where they were compensating their salary, you know, to maintain that difference, then that would have had implications, obviously, for the budget. And so I think that's part of the reason why things are done well in advance. But unfortunately, we can't go back and undo what action they had taken. So they decided to do that, perhaps not realizing the full implications. But maybe, and that's maybe partly why we are here, right? It's to take another look at this whole situation and see where we're at now, and proceed from there.
I guess at the end of the day, we can't change what has been done.
No.
All we can try to do is, you know, offset it and move forward.
That's correct. Martin?
I guess my comment to that is that I'm hoping is that the only time that's happened, or is there other times when other decisions are made without proper research and understanding, and then we end up doing stuff that isn't their correct move. This happened to be one that affected their own pocketbooks. Is there, you know, can we name any other situations where this happens? Because I think this is where a part of a council's pay comes in as well, is that if they have a job to do and are they doing it well? That's how it is in the private sector, certainly. So to me, that's one issue that happened, but it's got, to me, this bears a bit of weight on the whole idea of remuneration. The better.
Yeah, but I'm warning you, as I say, but this is not a business. So I can't really look at it as remuneration as they're not really employees.
No.
In a way they are, but they're not. I mean, this is something you were elected to do. You're applying the same thing, but yeah, I can't picture this with the remuneration as a business. I don't know if we can or not. Thoughts?
Anyway, I will leave it there. I'm point made. I certainly wanted it to be revisited, and I think we've done that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, I see your point, and I think obviously, speaking for myself and perhaps others on the committee, we obviously, I think, feel that the council members need to be compensated fairly. And if there have been some mistakes made in the past, we certainly need to look at that, I think, and going forward, how we can proceed that in the best way. But obviously, I'm not sure. Any other comments on that, Michelle? I'm not sure.
Madam Chair, through you, no, this was just information. We had talked about at the last meeting what would have been the implications had the 1/3 been implemented. What was the cost? Where would that have taken them, and things like that. This particular report addressed those options and also included the chart at the end of the report that showed what the implications were to each of their the respective members of council base salaries in order to ensure that they were revenue neutral, essentially, and that the amount of take-home pay was the same regardless of whether or not the 1/3 exemption was included or not. And that was the purpose of providing this report to the committee, was so you could see what the actual financial implications would be to the base salaries. So as you'll note, the mayor, in order to be able to ensure that take-home pay was the same, the additional salary that was required was more than that of both the deputy mayors and the respective council members. And just so for your background, the reason that is so much more was because once the mayor's salary reached a certain level, it became taxable income. Before, as you're probably all aware, you're allowed to make a certain amount of revenue, a certain amount of income each year, where you actually aren't taxed on it. Every member of the community, there's a base amount before you're actually taxed on it. But when there was an adjustment made to when the 1/3 tax exemption was removed, that made the salary for both the mayor and the deputy mayor to become taxable a certain point, so that in order to, because they now had, based on deductions at source, because we now had to deduct more money, actually income tax, from them at source in order to give them the same take-home pay, the increase was substantially more. So for the members of council, the increase only needed to be $200 to each of them, because there was no income tax deducted because the amount was lower. Once the deputy mayor, the increase that was necessary was $1,100 to increase to that base rate in order to ensure the net take home was the same. And for the mayor, it was $2,600. So it looks like they're getting a substantial increase in their salary, but the amount of take home pay is essentially the same as it was before. It all has to do with the deductions at source and that needs to be taken once that 1/3 exemption of tax-free amount is removed from the picture.
Okay.
Well, that only works too, I would understand, is if the mayor and the deputy mayor didn't have other jobs. Because otherwise their wages are added on to their wage that they're making outside of council, right?
No, all of these calculations are taken independent to whatever. So if this was the only job they had absolutely no other income of any way, shape, or form. The mayor's salary. So if you're on that chart on page 17 of your agenda package, on the far right-hand side, there's a column that says fully taxable and grossed up at the top.
Right.
So it indicates that the salary currently, or when this report was done, was $20,697.96. In order to ensure that the net pay ended up being the same under the new taxable guidelines, you had to add $2,600 to it, which brought it to 23,297, and then immediately underneath there. So all of those taxable earnings are now taxable, whereas before 1/3 was taxed. So the deductions at source now have to go up substantially in order to get, because of the new tax structure, and at the end, his net pay is 20,120. So almost the same as it was before. It's a little bit less than it was before, but it's because of the income tax and the CPP that has to come off of those. And that is calculated based only on the revenue of the 20,000. Has nothing to do with whether or not they had another amount in their own personal income from another job, from retirement income, whatever the case may be. These calculations are entirely just based on the amount that the township pays to them.
Okay, that's understandable.
But the 1/3 exemption is fairly substantial because, of course, if you look at the first column that says 1/3 tax exempt, so the annual remuneration for the mayor is exactly the same at the 20,000, but the amount that he gets taxed on is only 13,000. So the amount of deductions on 13,000 are substantially less. So once that income that he's taxed on becomes the 20,000, then of course the amount of deduction goes up substantially. So that's the difference, and that's why you see the differences in the calculations.
That's good.
So it obviously made quite a difference, that 1/3 tax exemption, but again, that they chose at the time to take no action, right? So Martin, did you have a comment?
Yes. I understand the way it happened. I understand how we got to that. But if I decide to go get a part-time job, it's going to have, I should get paid what it's worth, not what the taxable implication is going to be. And I know that's why we're here now. I just because now when you start increasing pay by percentages, suddenly that councillors are going to lag behind the mayor, and further and further we go. So I have it was a stopgap measure. We did what we did. I don't think I would have necessarily wanted to see it that way, but so it was done. And because all those other people have some other income, so they ended up with $200, which certainly wasn't enough if they put if they took that, if they added that to whatever their taxable income was, and they made 50 grand, then it's going to be a whole different story. So
I don't disagree, Martin, that the implications to each council member was different based on their other personal financial situation. The difficulty is the municipality doesn't have access to those personal records, shouldn't. And so the job of the municipality is to compensate them for this job. And you're absolutely right. If I had 3 or 4 jobs, each employer doesn't necessarily know what I'm making at any of the other jobs, and it's up to me to make the determination of the decisions based on my own personal financial situation. The municipality that doesn't make the decisions based on whether or not a council member has no other income, or whether they are making $1 million in other income. And so these calculations are based entirely just on what the municipality was paying. But I don't disagree with you, and we've since heard that it had significant implications on some members' personal income tax as a result of other income that they had from other sources. And so that was one of the challenges. But the municipality wasn't the decision to make those changes or to even do these calculations. We don't have access to that information to be able to suggest to members of council that, well, because you're making 50,000 somewhere else, this is actually going to mean a difference in, it's actually going to cost you more. But we don't have that information, so we couldn't have highlighted that necessarily.
Well, and again, too, we're looking at, our committee is are looking at positions, not people, right? So because the people may change, but we sort of have to look at what work is involved, what that position, I guess, is worth, if you want to say that. And Richard, did you have a comment there?
Yeah, I guess I agree with what Michelle is saying. There's no other way of doing it effectively other than picking this particular, their rate of pay based on council and doing the calculations, because otherwise, if you're trying to do it based on other income as well, it would be an ongoing job. Every year that could change. Every time you get a new council, that could change. And then it starts to have effects on the budgets and stuff as well.
Or they get another job, period.
Absolutely. Yeah. So there's no, I don't see any other way of doing it other than the way it's been done right now.
Okay, well, if there isn't any other comments on that report specifically, and of course we can sort of come back, we certainly can keep referring to that, because that's obviously good information, and I think as we've determined, that's perhaps why we're here doing what we're doing, to kind of, I don't want to say perhaps rectify, or to look at what's been done in the past. And I think that's kind of historically, it gives us a little bit of historical, if you want to call it, context there. If we could move on to if everyone is okay with moving ahead to the next item on the agenda, the discussion of council remuneration. The excerpts from the council meetings of May 9 and May 23rd, and that was of 2019. And again, this sort of, I believe, and you could speak to this more, Michelle, but this is giving us a little bit more of that context of what happened and sort of perhaps why, if you want to speak more to that.
Certainly, through you, Madam Chair. So in 2018, the decision was made to not make any changes to the base rates. In May of 2019, the council discussed it again and determined that they did want to see adjustments made to the base rate to address that 1/3 tax-free exemption. So that's the excerpts from May 9th, and I just pulled the council resolutions in the background. And then again on May 23rd, there was actually a public meeting that was held as a result of the requirements of the Municipal Act. When council considers its remuneration, it's required to do it in a public session. And so there was that discussion. There was the costs that were calculated, and then later on in that meeting, there was a bylaw that was passed that is the new bylaw that you have had to reference from. So you would have seen that the councillor salaries did increase by roughly those amounts that had been identified previously. So the 1/3 tax-free exemption in 2019, there was an adjustment made at that point in time. And then I believe, and I don't have firm information, but I believe that council's intent was that that be a temporary stopgap measure in the wages, and anticipating that this council was going to be coming forward and would be doing a full review. So we had talked previously about the fact that there may need to be an adjustment made to the wages because there had been a wage freeze for a number of years. And then that there may need to be a further adjustment as a result of the tax-free exemption. The council did in 2019 pass a bylaw that addressed the 1/3, or at least to a degree, based on the information. It brought it back to the 2017 rate. So there still might be some, there might be still a shortfall to some degree had they have been making regular increases all along. But that part has been somewhat addressed. The last item, if I can jump just to the next one as well, the charts that have been included during the last meeting through you, Madam Chair. The councillors had asked, well, what if they had got regular increase, or sorry, the committee's members had asked, what if council members had received the regular kind of cost of living increases all the way along? If they hadn't have froze their wages, where would their wage levels have been? So the finance department did run those calculations, and the bylaw, the council remuneration bylaw, currently has a provision in it that says that councillor wages would be increased at the same annual percentage as what the municipal staff wage increases are. So this particular chart on starting on page 22 of your agenda package, references the municipal staff salary increases at the top, and then does the calculations accordingly for the individual members of council. So you could see in 2011, these were the figures. And then as you move forward, what the amounts would have been had those regular cost of living increases been applied, to the point of in 2019 and 2020, it shows what the salaries would have been, at what they are currently and what they would have been. So that is some background information for you as well, to kind of, you know, I know there was some questions about, well, what would it have been? Where would our base amount be as a starting point? And is that maybe appropriate had they not have had the wage freezes? So this gives you those calculations. And then when we had looked at comparisons with other municipalities, if you take these calculations and look at what other municipalities are, that maybe puts it into a little better context than it was before.
Clear as mud.
Well, and
It's
certainly
a lot of information.
I
there
know,
is a lot of information.
The reason I ask this, and there's one thing that's just surprising about all of this is, like, the government, it says here, justified this change on the basis that it provides an advantage that other Canadians do not enjoy. Could you, what they mean by that?
Yeah. My understanding of what they mean by that is that by having 1/3 of your wage tax-free, that's an advantage that the rest of us don't have. So when we're paid, when we receive salaries, wages and salaries and benefits, we're taxed on 100% of those.
Same as everybody, exactly.
Right? Whereas municipal council members, and this had gone on for many decades, is applied. There was a review undertaken, and the government at that time decided that having council members have 1/3 of their incomes tax-free was an unfair advantage over other Canadians. So the rest of us all pay revenue, or all pay income tax based on 100% of our earnings on our income. Or, you know, with subject to whatever other deductions we may have, but essentially all of our income, that wages and benefits that are earned, are taxable. Municipal council members weren't taxed on all of their earnings. So the government made the change and then left it up to individual municipal corporations, organizations, to decide whether or not their base rate should be adjusted in order to have them continue to have the same take-home pay.
Thank God I wasn't on that committee. Well, oh no, because it's such, because that's what this whole thing seems to be based on, and that's why when I read this a couple times, and I just noticed it said provide an advantage that other Canadians do not enjoy. And as you said, Martin, you cannot think of the pay for a councillor, which includes the mayor and deputy mayor, as a job, but to them they do.
Well,
Revenue Canada, they absolutely do.
Yeah, but they absolutely do. So yeah, and I never really thought of it like that. So wow, yeah, that like I say, I can understand it, but it's I think they should have kept the tax-free section of it just as an incentive for people to run. So I wish we could change history, because in my opinion, I think that was a mistake, but it's done. But if you give them more money, then they go up to a different tax bracket. Oh man, what a mess.
It's not simple, that's for sure.
It's such a mess. My God.
Not a
It doesn't,
Martin,
doesn't
did
matter
you
how
have
much,
a comment there?
it doesn't matter how much we give them. We're going to be behind the 8 ball here because the
Oh yes,
keeps
absolutely.
chasing.
Yeah.
Right.
I do have a question on, so what happened in 2013? We rolled back to 2011 rate. You could fill us in what happened there, Michelle, please.
Yeah, the council of the day. So there was, the council of the day decided at that point that they wanted to freeze their wages, and they essentially rolled them back to the 2011 tax rate. So there was, where am I here? I guess that's the thing, is there had been some calculations done. There was some adjustments made, and then they decided to put it back. So essentially the wage freeze has been since 2011.
Mhm.
Decisions were made periodically along the way, and the amounts have been held.
Yeah, but I'm talking now about the entire council pay in 2013 was rolled back to 2011 rate.
That was a decision of council, yeah.
Right. And it was any, I don't remember was there any real reason that we did that at that time?
My understanding of the decision,
Sure.
I don't want to speak on behalf of individual members of council, but my recollection of the discussion was that they were looking to try to save costs. Some members of council may recall that in 2012, there was significant public comment and criticism of increases in taxes, and some members of public became more vocal in 2012. And my belief is that in 2013, when budgets were being set in 2013, that the decision to freeze council wages was in response to that public outcry and criticism.
Mhm.
But again, I don't want to speak on behalf of the motivation of individual members of council because I'm not privy to that. That's my recollection of some of the discussions that took place at the time and my assumptions.
Yeah. I remember those days.
So, and if I can just clarify, because like I say, there's a lot of these charts are really useful and interesting to look at, especially the the additional information about what the implications are if you revise those salaries and to make up for that 1/3 tax exemption, for example. But just to clarify, this we had, and I think this was earlier, that we were given a bylaw number 19-49. That is what we're currently working off of. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
And the salaries in those charts, starting on page 22, under the 2019 column, the blue lines are the amounts from that bylaw. So there are blue highlighted text. So for the mayor, $23,297.96. That's
right.
The amount that he's currently being compensated in accordance with the bylaw. 17,024.12 for the deputy mayor and 11,350.52 for members of council. The brownish shaded section directly underneath is what those salaries would have been had there been regular increases applied all the way along.
And have they actually, and I probably should know this, but again, I've been reading a lot, have they actually agreed so that for 2020, for example, they are going to get that 1.5% increase as other municipal staff?
Yes, so the wage freeze that was in place is not in place any longer. So the bylaw, as I mentioned, has a provision in there that council wages will be increased based on the same salary percentage of the municipal staff.
Yes.
So 2019, that was the rate, and now, and which you see in the bylaw. So for 2020, however, there's been an automatic increase, and in 2020, the actual salary that's referenced there in that column is indeed the actual salary that they're being compensated.
Right.
The amount, the second one where, so for example, for the mayor, if we use that one for an example, the current salary for the mayor in 2020 is $23,647.43. Had there have been regular increases applied, that would amount to $26,118.68.
Yep.
And again, that gives us some context, but I'm also, it's unfortunate, but I don't think we can, now, how do I want to say this? I was going to say, we can't go back and change that because that is something they decided, those number of years ago. Perhaps for this committee, it's, again, to try to decide, it gives us context as to where it might have been and what is a fair wage for these positions. And I guess that's where we have to go from here. That's
If I may, Madam Chair, I think the purpose of this, providing this chart to you, was to enable you to have a better comparison when you're looking at the comparators of other municipalities as well, because one of the mandates of this committee is to ensure that, council's getting a fair wage, but also to look at what's happened with comparable municipalities, and then also to look at benefits. So we had the chart and we looked into previous meetings at what our neighbors were making on council. And I had mentioned at that point that it was somewhat difficult. Yes, it appeared that we were underpaid compared to some of our neighbors. But again, some of those neighbors are seeing regular annual increases. So in order to be able to kind of know, back in 2011, when the original bylaw was put in place, I would argue that we were in much closer comparison to our neighbors.
Sure.
And then as a result of the wage freeze, fallen a little bit behind, I would suggest. And this is where it would have been. And so this, again, is just to provide you with some more context. And when you're looking at comparisons in terms of, what our other neighbors have been doing.
Yeah.
No, that's important information to have, obviously.
Susie,
Yes, sorry.
questions?
Martin?
We have questions.
Yeah, I just want to comment. So when we look in 2019, the blue is the grossed up number, but the tan color is also using the grossed up $2,600 number, and for the deputy mayor, the 1,100 and the
Correct.
Correct. Those. So if we like that column, those are grossed up numbers there as well.
Hi, Chris. I'm just at
Yes.
a Zoom meeting
Okay.
on High Township. Can I give you a call back when this is done? Okay, thanks again.
Put him on mute once in a while.
So that's all I wanted to make sure that everybody is aware that those were grossed up numbers that we were seeing there in the tan color.
Correct.
Okay.
Just a clarification of it. Right now, they are getting a percentage increase every year, correct?
2020 was the first year that in percentage increase has been applied since 20.
Okay. So going forward, now they will continue to get a percentage increase based on the cost of living, correct?
Based on the agreed wage increase for the rest of municipal staff. So it isn't exactly cost of living, but it's the same wage rate increase that municipal staff received, the council members were. And just to point of clarification, in 2011 and 2012, the bylaw that was in place at that point in time for council remuneration included that provision as well. So council, notwithstanding that the bylaw actually said there would be annual increases, chose not to take that. So they chose to freeze their wage, notwithstanding that so there was always a provision in the bylaw. There was always an intent in the bylaw to have annual increases, but council at the time decided not to take those. And now the decision has been made going forward to take those, at least for 2020. And then it may be dependent on what this committee decides to recommend or whatever other changes there may be. But the provision is currently in the bylaw to enable that to happen.
Okay, so we know that their wages are going to be increased on an annual basis going forward.
Providing they don't decide something different.
And then that's their choice. That's out of our control and this committee's control, right? That's something that they make the decision on.
Oh,
If
there's
I
nothing-
may, Madam Chair, this committee has the ability to make recommendations different than what the current bylaw is. So the current bylaw includes those provisions, but if for whatever reason this committee recommended that it should be a different amount, a different way of calculating annual increases, whatever, the entire compensation package is at your disposal to be able to make comment and recommendation. If you choose not to address that, then yes, those provisions still exist in the bylaw.
Okay.
We have option 1 to 4, and then we have a decision to make an option 5. That's pretty well it.
Which options are you referring to?
Well,
Kev?
like just the comments from the 2018 budgets, like option 1 was the compensating salary increase. We have like 4 options right now, which we have, or we could have an option 5. Is that pretty well what you're saying? And because as a recommendation?
Well, though, I
No,
think those options from that, well, go ahead, Michelle, you can clarify.
Those options have already been addressed by council having made the decision in May of 2019.
Yeah.
So essentially, this committee needs to decide what is an appropriate base salary for all of the positions.
Mm-hmm.
Then and then have the ability to make recommendations on how that base salary may be adjusted on an annual basis, or not adjusted for that matter. And then any additional benefits or any other types of recommendations. We talked at one point about mileage, whether or not there should be any type of medical dental benefits or those types of things. The entire compensation package is at your purview to come back and make recommendations based on base, as well as what you suggest, how it should be addressed going forward.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I guess from my perspective, what I see is that they're at least average as far as wages right now. They're not at the top of the heap, they're not at the bottom. But if our role is to help, and where we see it numerous times come into play, that we want to, I guess in a way, look at more or different types of people, looking at these, the councillor roles, the mayor's roles, more experience, more background or whatever, then you've got to provide something that's going to make it more appealing to them to want to run for these types of elections. So we take a look at that, and they're not, the people that are going to run aren't going to have access to all the information we do right now, what the other, I guess, councils are getting. But if we say that this is reasonable to start with, one of the concerns I have, and I've been looking and going over what I consider maybe some recommendations to think of, is when we look at a percentage increase, the one that creates a problem. The problem being is the mayor, the deputy mayor, and the councillors' wages will continue to grow further and further apart. The mayor will get more, the deputy mayor and the councillors will continue to fall behind just because of the base rate that they're going at. My one recommendation for consideration to this team is to look at a flat rate increase rather than a percentage, because once again, it's going to create a problem down the road that somebody else is going to have to solve, because the difference will become too great at some point in time. And, you know, when I took a look at the averages and stuff like that over the years of what they would have got, you know, I looked at it and said, okay, $300 as a flat rate increase, everybody would get the same amount. So the mayor and the deputy mayor and the councillors aren't treated any differently. And I look at it and say, some of the reason behind that is that if you're going to give the mayor more money on an increasing basis, then what's caused that? Is the roles and responsibility of the mayor increased at a greater rate? you know, than what the councilor or the deputy mayor? Are they taking on more responsibility than everybody else? If they were, then I could see them getting a larger increase to compensate for that. But if they're doing the same job next year and the year after as what they're doing now, then keeping that spread between them seems to me to be a more reasonable thing, which means a flat rate increase of, say, something like $300 annually would work better long-term than a percentage would be. So that's just my comments and my thoughts on it.
Good point.
There are a fair number of differences in responsibility,
Yes.
I believe, right, Michelle, with mayor, deputy mayor compared to councilors.
There are definite differences in responsibilities. I think it's somewhat subjective to determine whether or not, or how great a difference it is. I wouldn't want to say that it's hugely different. I wouldn't want to say that it's moderately different or just that it's different. There are additional responsibilities for the mayor just through the legislation. And the deputy mayor, of course, if the mayor is unavailable, then those responsibilities fall to her. They do have responsibilities at county council on behalf of the municipality, but they're compensated outside of that for county council. So that really shouldn't should have a bearing on it. But certainly as the head of council and the deputy head of council, there are additional roles and responsibilities that those two individuals have. And which is why you see in the compensation that they receive different amounts, and why you see in other municipalities that's the same approach that's taken as the recognition. But I wouldn't be able to comment fairly on either the number of hours additional that they would have to put in, you know, those we've talked a little bit about some of the types of things that they would do, but I don't have access to their calendars to know, you know, how many more hours, for example, a week that they put in more than the others do. They do have additional roles and responsibilities. But
Yeah, I think the only fair way of actually looking at it is based on what the provincial government defines as roles and responsibilities for each one of the mayor, the deputy mayor, and the councilor, and that should define the difference in the wages. All I'm looking at is I'm okay with the difference in the wages. I'm okay with the difference in the responsibilities. What I like I say, I feel is that they shouldn't continue to go apart unless for some reason the provincial government adds more roles and responsibilities on the mayor that they should be compensated for, different than what, say, the councilor would be. So otherwise, that's what I say, I would go back to a flat rate, you know, rather than a percentage, and try to keep that spread where it is so that we don't create another problem.
Martin?
Well, I agree with Richard in the percentages are always going to spread you farther and farther and farther apart. And it's, that's a problem in society in general, is that, you know, the person that's pouring your coffee at Tim Hortons gets 2%, and, you know, you or I get 2%. There's a different number, that's all. And eventually that is a problem. And I agree with Richard to some degree. I don't know how you could incorporate that into wage increases, but it's certainly worth talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess, so where do we go from here? Because we've got, the way I'm viewing it is we've got a lot of background information. We kind of know what's happened historically. We understand why, but I correct me if I'm wrong, the rest of the committee members, I'm thinking we're at a point now where we're kind of perhaps getting to a point where we need to start discussing what options do we think are best? How are we going to move forward? Getting to the point, maybe, and again, Michelle, maybe jump in if I'm wrong here, but are we at a point where we should be thinking about what do we want to suggest? What do we want to recommend? And Richard's point about flat rate, that's a good point taken. That's perhaps something, one way that we could approach it. And then I think we need to start getting down to the nuts and bolts of exactly what we're going to recommend.
Yeah.
That's my feeling on it.
And also why we're recommending this. Sorry.
Well, exactly. And that's a very important point, is why. If we want to recommend something, whether it's a flat rate increase, whatever it is, and what it's going to be, then obviously we need to have some good reasons for doing that, obviously. Is that, no?
Yeah, Madam Chair, through you, I would agree, unless there was additional background information that you thought you needed in advance of starting to have those discussions, then I would suggest to you that you're right. Now is probably the point where you need to figure out where you're going to go. Maybe just to help the discussions a little bit, there were a number of things that we chatted about in the first meeting, about things we wanted to take into, and I use the term we as the committee, wanted to take into consideration. So you needed to, as we talked about, we needed to establish a base salary. So where's the starting point? What do we think is a reasonable salary that based on all the information that you've got? Then as well, in addition to that base salary, should you be looking at implementing any type of additional meeting pays? Should you be looking at any suggested increases in per diems? Should you be looking at any additional benefits over and above the current mileage stipend that they receive? Should there be an adjustment to that mileage stipend? Should it be handled differently? So those are some, and again, how going forward, if you establish this base, what's going to happen for 2020 or 2021, then going forward, do you have suggestions or recommendations on how to keep it current, on how to, or how quickly when should the next review take place? So I think those are kind of, if we kind of make a list of the different things we want to talk about, I'm not suggesting you need to have changes in any or all of them. I think those are the things that at the beginning had been discussed as potential things to consider.
Yes, I agree. So perhaps, and I'm just looking at our time here because we're coming up to 11. We normally are scheduled till
it's entirely up to the committee. So,
right.
so your availability, staff are here to support you. It's entirely up to the committee how long you wish to continue discussion and deliberations.
So perhaps just if I can get some input from the rest of the members here, we can continue to discuss. I know basically I could go a bit longer. I do have other things that I need to attend to today, obviously. I'm sure everybody does, but do we want to start some of those discussions now? Do we want to, as Michelle suggests, make a list of everything that we should be or had talked about considering, and come back to our next meeting with some concrete suggestions on how we see that? And I know, Richard, you've already made a suggestion. I appreciate that of that flat rate increase, but maybe some actual facts, figures, concrete suggestions as to what we're each thinking should happen. Martin, did you? Or,
Yes.
yeah, Martin, go ahead.
So, we're talking about approximate time and so many days a week, and so it's a part-time job. And I think one of the chores here is to try to identify how much of a part-time job is it? Is it a 15%? Is it a 20% or 25% of a wage? I think I think we need to try to read between the lines on the report that we received, try to come up with some sense of what amount of time the average puts in. Then I guess if we come up with that, then what do we, and we said, suppose we said it's 20%. 20% of what? 20% of, the average living wage in Malahide, 20% of the average wage of a blend of the Malahide employees, because they're a Malahide employee. Are we using some of that information to help us out here? Because they're a part-time employee of Malahide. Should we be using that as a benchmark? Any thoughts on that?
Richard, did you go ahead, Richard?
Yeah, I'm just looking at moving forward from here, from this meeting. What are our next steps? And I guess if it was me personally, one of the things I would look at, as we've already discussed, is the base rate. Is it enough? And I think those are the kind of things we can put a question to, and we can put an answer to. Is the base rate enough for the three positions? Yes or no? If we agree yes, then we move on. That's the recommendation, that it stays the way it is. If it's no, then what is the recommendation from us to increase it to what level? The next question would be should there be an annual increase? Yes or no? And if we feel that no, then we leave it the way it is now to get the percentage increase, and that would be it. If the answer is no to it, we don't figure it's appropriate, then we come back with what's the suggestion? Is it a flat rate? If it's a flat rate, yes. Then what do we move on with? What is that flat rate? So I think we could start coming up with, like I say, those questions and the answers, and we can start moving forward quite quickly. We have a lot of data to go on. We know what other councillors and mayors are paid at in other areas. We know what happened in the past. We can't change the past. So what we can do is we can move forward from here. We look at the issue of, gas mileage. I look at that, and I've been putting some ideas together on, recommendations, and, they're getting paid 45 cents. And my suggestion to that would be once again, is it enough? Yes or no? If it's not enough, what should it be? Do we increase it simply to the 58 cents a kilometer, which is the maximum that they can really go to? And then simply, why would we do it? And those questions we can help, because it's the councillors that are going to have to go back to the public and say, this is why we did it. And if we look at just the issue on gas mileage, take a look at what it costs a person to buy a car in this day and age. Take a look at what it costs to go to a garage to get your car serviced. It's, you're talking $110 an hour. All these things come into play when I'm using a personal vehicle every day. And some of the things that, the public as in large maybe doesn't think about, that these people are out there doing these types of things. So I also look at it and say, yet once again, yes or no? Do we leave it as it is? Do we increase it? If we want to increase it, we increase it to what? All those become our recommendations to the team. And I think those are the kind of things we can move through quickly. And then there's, I guess, the other part that I look at, are there things that we want to, recommendations we want to make, not just necessarily for this council, but for possible future councils, where we're looking at, once again, do we want to advertise for Malahide to take a look at bringing, say, other people on board when it comes election time? So what do you offer? What are the kind of things that people would be interested? Me as a retiree, I look at it and say, one of the things that would tweak me really quick is if there was some sort of a benefit package as far as something like a medical or dental. And this is where Michelle would have to come in and say, what would it cost, the voters of Malahide to offer that, and could there be something that could be put in place that says, okay, here's the maximum you're entitled to as far as this medical benefit, to a maximum of say $300 a year or whatever it happens to come out at. and here's the things that you can choose from. You can't have all of them. You might, so somebody might say, well, I'll pick dental and eyeglasses or whatever. But those are the kind of things that would benefit maybe the people now, but it might better benefit when we're looking at attracting more people on board. Like I say, those are some of the things that I've been thinking about that I wanted to throw out. But once again, we can put, do we want to do something? Once again, yes or no. And if it's simply no, then Michelle doesn't have any homework to do. If it's yes, it's worth consideration.
Well, you know, we know how much.
Now has to start getting quotes. So that's my thought on moving forward.
Like, I know, Michelle, you have a lot of pull. I mean, as you mentioned in the first meeting about, for us, our compensation is no property tax for a year. I think that's amazing. You know, you can do that.
I don't think she mentioned that.
I don't recall that conversation.
I'm sure it was.
So,
yeah.
sorry, Kev, did you have another comment?
Well, I think what I would like to see is just a list of all the things that we have to check off, such as like the compensation and mileage, everything, just sort of just an itemized sheet of all the things that we have to, that we may be overlooking, that we, you know, such as like talking about like a medical package, is that feasible or not, or something like that.
Yeah, I guess that's my question. Yeah.
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair. I don't have the information in terms of what that would cost, although we can certainly look at it. There are some municipalities that do offer medical benefits to their council members. There are others that don't. So we have a benefit provider that the municipality does. I could certainly look into if the committee was interested in getting a costing. The other thing is that, even as Richard said, you know, to kind of start to narrow down, are we interested in going this way or not? Even if we don't make some final decisions, if there are some aspects of those categories, as Kevin had mentioned, kind of the listing of things, I can certainly go back and start to pull together some additional backing, or even some tentative costings. Even if you say, you know what, we're interested in increasing the base wage by $5,000 for every member. And I can go back based on all the other information and come up with, you know, some tentative financial costing, so that at the end you can say, oh, you know what, we thought 5,000 was great. But at the end of the day, when we look at the whole package together, maybe we only want to look at $500 or $1,000 or whatever.
Yeah.
So, or maybe if you think in your minds, maybe the overall compensation package should be X number of dollars, and then we'll look at how much of that package we want to set as base, how much we want to apply to benefits, how much we want to apply to meeting pay. Maybe there's a breakdown. Maybe in your minds, you know what the overall total amount of the compensation should be in your thoughts. And then you want to kind of split it out into other things, or you want to just do a base salary and no benefits or anything. So we can certainly work on some of those tentative costings if we know the direction that the committee wants to go. I'm certainly not looking for, you know, to put staff in to do a lot of calculations that the committee is not interested in.
No, that's not what I meant. I don't need the numbers. I just need the category of the things that we have to look at. There's no use doing the numbers yet. You don't want to give you extra work when we don't know. That's for us to decide. But if we just had a listing of just things like like a benefit package, I'm not saying we're going to have something that we can look into. And any of the other things, such as mileage, and if there's anything else we should be looking at that we may have forgotten. That's all.
Well, perhaps, and I agree and Michelle had kind of mentioned a number of things, and I just was quickly writing some of those down. Perhaps we can decide at this point. I don't know if it's too quick to decide this. Let me know. But to give us sort of a concrete way to go forward, maybe we can make that list together right now. So, for example,
really?
are we interested in looking at the base salary?
Yes.
As Richard said, yes or no?
Yes.
Yes.
I would say yes.
Yes. Okay. Are we interested in looking at? So that is one item that we're definitely going to look at. Are we interested in looking at pay for meetings.
Yes.
Anybody else? Do we want to look at that?
Why not put it on the list? This is where
That's what I'm
putting a
just-
hit list together, it's easier
Put
to
it
have
on the list.
everything on there,
Sure.
Exactly.
stuff off after.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are we,
I don't want to make decisions now. I just want a list of the things that we should be
that's-
talking. Yeah.
yeah, and that's what I'm doing. It's just making the list. I'm not wanting to discuss the issues in each one, but let's just put a list together of what we will look at. So we're going to look at base salary. We're going to look at meeting pay. Do we want to look at mileage?
Yes.
Like I say, just
be reviewed.
Okay. And the other one, another one, I believe, Michelle, was per diem increases, because that's, remind me, that is for some meetings.
That is for events or meetings outside of the municipality. So
Right.
the thought process in that, in other municipalities, is that a council member may have to not go to their regular place of employment on a particular day because they have to attend some function outside of the municipality, outside of kind of your regular working hours. So that, or during regular working hours, sorry. And so this per diem is intended to compensate them for other potential lost income or revenue opportunities that they would have otherwise.
So could we look at per diem increases, or no increases, but could we look at per diem? Is that okay?
Yes.
Yep.
All right, we'll add that to our list. And could we also add to this list benefit package? Again, I'm not saying, I'm not asking staff to do any research at this point as to what that might look like. I'm just adding it to our list of things.
If we want to get involved in that, yes.
If we went, and Richard, you had mentioned that. So benefit package.
I think
So-
you look at the annual increase. And we can talk about the percentage versus flat rate.
An annual increase. Okay. So on my list, oh, sorry, Martin.
Do we have access to the average wage in Malahide?
I believe so, through Stats Canada. Yeah,
Maybe we can look that up on our
to
own.
obtain that.
I
May
think
not
that's,
be classified that exact amount, but yes, we have some information that we can get for that.
yeah. I think that's an important number. That's a starting number for me. To know, once we come up with percentages of how much of a part-time job, we can start bouncing it off of the average wage in Malahide. I think that's an important piece for me.
Yes, acquire that information.
Okay, thank you. So on our list of things we're going to consider, it's base salary, meeting pay, per diem pay, mileage, benefit package, annual increase versus flat rate. Michelle, I'll ask you, Michelle, is there anything glaring that, and I know it's up to us to decide what we're going to look at, but is there anything that is obvious that we've missed there?
No, based on the information and the categories that are already in the council remuneration bylaw, this would address all of those items. So I don't see anything else. Is
Maybe
specific.
we're taking on too much. No, that's good. So that gives us sort of some, this is what we need to look at, and
It's a meet. Yeah.
yeah. And is it fair to say, again, I'm kind of just trying to work out what our next steps are, because and I like Richard's approach of looking at each of these categories and saying, what do we think? Yes or no? Like, increase, decrease, stay the same. And Martin's, if we get some more information about average wages, think a bit more about what, again, perhaps go back to that comparative chart that we were given with other municipalities, because I think that's important. It is interesting to see what an average wage is, but it's also interesting to sort of compare similar types of jobs too. So that's why I think the comparator with other municipalities is important to see where they are and where we want to go from here. So could we come back with some ideas of how we feel about each of these, whether we think there should be any changes, or if there are changes, what we would like to see? Is that fair?
I like that.
I like that too, yep.
Recommendations.
That's okay, Martin?
Yeah, good with me.
Okay. Does that sound workable, Michelle?
Certainly.
Okay. All right. I think that's perhaps what we should do. And so it's, again, more reading, thinking, discussing as far as how we feel we should move forward with this. We do have quite a bit of background information. And is there anything else as far as background that you think you might need in order to start making some of these decisions as to where we go next? Anything else?
I can't think of anything. I'm good.
Oh, I'm good.
I think I'm fine. Yep.
All right. And perhaps we can then move to the next committee meeting and what we will look at there. Is this day of the week working for everyone?
Works for me.
Okay, day and time. Michelle?
Yeah, no problem for staff.
Okay. So in another 2 weeks, that is August 25th at 10 a.m. And I'm checking one calendar. If you'll just give me one moment, I'm going to check another one. Too many calendars.
I'll check downstairs, huh?
Yeah, that would be a good point.
If I decide to stay there, I'll let you know.
We have two calendars, one on my desk downstairs and one in the kitchen, so we have to adjust all the time.
We have to coordinate everything.
Oh, yeah.
I think it's okay as far as my work. If library schedules start to change, it might be a little bit different, but right now we're not doing curbside pickup on Tuesday mornings, and so I've got a bit of flexibility here. So let's set that at August 25th at 10 a.m. And would it be Zoom or live? Do we know?
Still Zoom through you, Madam Chair. There will be no action to begin in-person meetings until at least September.
Okay, thank you. Martin?
If we have any thoughts or any ideas, is that something we would put on an email and share between everybody here, or are we going to wait till we show up at the next meeting with our ideas, and then you haven't seen them until that time?
It might expedite matters. Is that acceptable, Michelle, to have kind of conversations, information back and forth between the members?
Unfortunately, Madam Chair, that's not recommended. The job of this committee is to discuss things as a group and to discuss them in open public session.
Right.
So,
right.
That's a little bit challenging, but what I can do to facilitate the discussions for the next round is we could look at compiling, if each member wanted to send to me your thoughts and suggestions of each of those categories. I can send out now that we have the list of items we want to talk about, I could essentially send out in the next few days a kind of a chart and ask each of you to fill in your thoughts on that chart and then compile all the answers together that would kind of, so let's say, for example, flat rate, everyone agrees that the flat rate, and this is what I think the flat rate increase should be, and the next person it should be here, and we can establish a range and start the, you know, at least compile the information that can be sent out with the agenda package. People's thoughts and ideas, and then it may make the discussions go a little bit quicker, if that would be helpful.
I think that'd be very helpful, because otherwise I'm telling you my ideas and Richard's telling us his ideas and Kevin is, and then the next thing you know, we're gonna take a whole bunch of time to try to understand those ideas.
Time's up, yeah.
Yeah.
I think that would be really, really useful. Thank you for that suggestion, because yeah, if we can, we need perhaps a little time to examine some of these documents again, but come to our own decisions, but also to see what everybody is thinking about before the next meeting. And then we've got, we can go ahead with the discussion. So that would be wonderful. Thank
I
you.
will do my best, but I apologize if I don't get back to you right away. I will be up north, and I'm not sure I have computer access out in the middle of the lake.
Oh, good for you.
But I will do what I can.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds
Through you,
wonderful.
Madam Chair, I should be able to get that chart out to council members possibly later today or early tomorrow morning. So I don't know whether that will help to facilitate it. And then if members could then complete it by early to mid next week, then that would enable us to be able to compile the information and then be ready to send out with the agenda package for the 25th.
And Martin and I will not have web access because we're going to be up north, Richard, right?
Now,
Okay, that's not fair. I'm working away here.
Good. Sounds good.
Okay, I need a motion to adjourn, please. If everything, unless there's any other questions, I should have asked that first. No other questions? Motion to adjourn? Martin, seconder. Kevin, all in favor? We're all in favor? Okay,
okay, yes.
anything else? And